Welcome to the Cozy Little Library today with your Clean Reads Book Buddy. This is the November reading wrap-up, and it was a wonderful reading month. Over 20 books. I read nonfiction, sci-fi, clean fiction, Christian fiction, biblical fiction, classics, middle grade, all the genres, many 5 stars, but also I've got several controversial opinions on some books today.
Is everybody ready?
In the Christian historical fiction genre, I read A Winter by the Sea by Julie Klassen, book number 2 in the Devonshire Shores series. Book number 1 was The Sisters of Seaview, and I would highly suggest reading all 3 of the books in this series in order. You can read them standalone, but I believe, it's my opinion, you'll get so much more enjoyment out of this cozy atmosphere, meeting the people and really going in order and taking your time. Love this series so much. In book number 1, we find out that there are 5 Summers sisters, that's their last name, and the mom, and they're genteel, they're not used to work, but they find themselves in a place where they have to turn their seaside home, Seaview, into a boarding house. We learn about 4 of the sisters, 4 of the 5 in book number 1, and next to the eldest, Sarah is the main female lead here. In book number 2, we get to know Emily. She and her twin are next to the youngest of the 5, and she's bookish and fun, and we spend a lot of time in the library with her. She wants to be a writer. We get to know the 2 males that own the libraries in her seaside town, and we get to see the behind the scenes of how that industry worked at the time and how hard it is to be a writer and be taken seriously as a woman of that time. So much fun, but the most exciting part of this book is that the royals come to town and they bring unexpected danger and the sweet possibility of romance, because the Duke and Duchess of Kent and their daughter, the Queen Victoria, in this book, she's a baby. So very interesting. If you care anything about history, Regency era history, the royals, Queen Victoria, you will geek out over this book. But as you're geeking out over the details, Julie Klassen is so wonderful at bringing out huge historical events very accurately, plus the tiny little details, bringing all that accuracy of history and plopping it into a plot that is seamless, exciting, interesting, with just these little nuggets of history throughout. So you're not going to feel like you're reading a history book whatsoever. It is so cozy and wonderful. Gave this one 5 stars. Then I read book number 3 in this series. I had an advanced reader copy, and this was so very pleasant. We finally get to know sister number 5 that we haven't spent any time with in the other 2 books, because she has been disgraced. She's been exiled to Scotland, and we get to find out the real story, not secondhand, what Claire is really like, what her life has been like in exile. But because of some events, that situation is ending, and she finds an ad that has a job, and it's a very unusual business proposition, but she is longing to be back with her family. So you see all of that take place, but it's just a lot slower paced. It just felt so cozy and interesting and wonderful just to take your time and see how this is all going to play out, because I believe there's just one more novella that will happen next Christmas, if I understand correctly, and then that's going to be it for the series. So I was really sad to come to the end of this book, full-length book of this series, because I have enjoyed it so much. And reading book number 1 and number 2 with my patron members, we had so much fun. I read Miracles by C.S. Lewis, a nonfiction, because of the C.S. Lewis readathon, that Morgan's Endless Bookshelf, and Anne from In Search of Wonder. We all hosted that, and Miracles was the group read. This book was so different than I thought it was going to be. In my mind, it was going to be Lewis's storytelling voice, telling us why he believed in miracles, I was assuming. What this turned out to be is him in a very theological voice, thoughts, very academic, deep thoughts, arguing against modern historians that were dismissing miracles as not possible. And I appreciate what he was trying to say, but it was very difficult. It was a very difficult read. So definitely not just an easy read that you would pick up for sure, but I gave it 3 stars. I read a biblical fiction, The Queen's Cook by Tessa Afshar. Now, I'm not one to read much biblical fiction, so I don't have a whole lot to compare it to, but it was very interesting. We are following, the main character is Roxana, and she is in the time of Queen Esther. And so Queen Esther, you know, what's happening at the palace and everything is over here, connected to Roxana's world, learning about Roxana's family life and what's going on there. And it's not an ideal situation, and so she goes through a lot, but she's very gifted in the kitchen, and we meet her wonderful mom and her friends and a handsome person who comes in to help Roxana with her dad. And then we really get into the realm of the queen and all of the political strife, all of the things that are going on there, and the edict that is put forth for all of the Jewish people to be annihilated. We're really in the midst of that from Roxana and her people's view, and the way that Roxana is able to get closer to that situation from her talent and her gifts was very interesting. I love the chapters that started out with the thoughts and words of Esther, and then we would go back into the story of Roxana and her friends and family. So very interesting. I think Tessa Afshar is a very gifted writer. I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. In contemporary Christian fiction, I read Autumn by the Sea by Melissa Tagg, book number 1 in the Mur Harbor series. I did a buddy read with the Lucy Chronicles, and here's the controversial review. I did not love this book. I did not love this book. This book was so hyped, so well loved, and if you love this book, I'm so sorry. Now, I will say, as one who does reviews for clean reads, there was nothing wrong with this book in that area. It wasn't that it wasn't clean in any way. I just did not enjoy the dynamics of the different people, the love interest, the guy and the girl together. They didn't seem to match. I love the grandmother figure in the book and the main male lead. They were both great. The best friend of the guy was pretty good, but all the other characters were just like, and just the storyline, it just wasn't doing it for me. And one thing that really says a lot is that I would read a little bit. I kept waiting for it to get better and better, but then I would have to make myself pick it back up to read another section because we were buddy reading and I was reaching for other books besides this one. So that says a lot, and I'm so sorry. I don't want to be unkind. The writer, I love her descriptions of the landscape. There were a couple I'll read to you and show you, but then again, her writing style, like the way she used italics, it was just interrupting to my flow of reading. I mean, it is unique. It's just not what I thought it was going to be. So I think it was too hyped up in my mind. But I will show you some great places, some places that I thought was wonderful writing. It says, the sea's briny scent wrapped around him as they slowed, sunlight cascading from a sky nearly as blue as the waves crashing against the rocks. Most days he could get happily lost in a view like this, could feel the damp air erode his worries and carry them out to the ocean. With Captain at his feet, he'd listen to the surf and drink in the sight of white caps and gulls. Or, if it was night time, tip his head to count the stars and know that this was exactly where he belonged. So I love the description of the landscape. Okay, here's another part. Here is the faith part. So he goes from talking to thinking, and he says this he could do, talk about the work he loved, the land that felt a part of his very soul, the tending to it an act of worship to the one who'd created it. That little faith nugget right there, I thought that was amazing. He was talking about farming and then attributed it to God creating it, and I was like, oh, that's so wonderful. But then as it got into the story, I was just like, I did love the Scottish Gaelic information. The girl siblings were very annoying to me. One of them was just mean and rude, and I don't know, they were just annoying. And I don't nitpick about books like that normally, but just something about this did just not jive with me, so I gave it 3 stars. In middle grade, I read the American Girl Molly books. Morgan's Endless Bookshelf and I have been reading through all the classic American Girl books month by month, and we thought it only fitting that in November we would read Molly, set in World War II, because November has Veterans Day. We thought that would be amazing. But I love this story because, of course, the patriotism, the sweet relationship between Molly and her dad, who has to go off to war and leave behind Molly and her siblings, and then her mom, all her friends that come in and out of the stories. There is tons of faith woven throughout this, and again, just lovely patriotic themes that are very subtle but profound. Loved it so much. Another thing that I liked was in the Christmas book. I loved how they showed slice of life of their Christmas traditions and how they were able to have a wholesome, fun time with the idea of Santa Claus, but the main focus was Jesus. They had Santa Claus, you know, as a side tradition, fun, but Jesus was the reason for the season, and it showed them going through their traditions, church, and the conversations. So wonderful. Of these 6 books, I gave 3 of them 4 stars and the other 3 5 stars. Highly recommend. In the clean historical fiction genre, I read 3 books in the Cleaver Castle series by Sally Britton. I have been raving about this series for months now. I think I read book 1 back in the spring, and it's all about a duke and a duchess and their family and their staff. They're in the middle of nowhere, England, but the stories are so atmospheric of this ancient castle and the gardens, and the stories, the conversations, they're interesting, they're pleasant, but they're lighthearted, and you just get pulled right into that world. And the books are not extremely long. I think they average about 250 pages ish, except there's a prequel that's a little bit shorter. But I love these books so much. The author says that she created this series, started writing in spring of 2020 for a bit of escapism to a pleasant world that people could kind of get away from what was happening in the world. But I love these sweet stories. They're not cringy whatsoever. They're just very fun Regency goings on and romance. Love it so much. During this month, I got to book number 4, which is Lord Farley and Miss Frost, and I read book number 5, and then I went back and read the prequel because I didn't realize there was one. I can't say enough about this book. The family is in a little bit of danger because the Duke is a very important person in society, and not everyone loves what he's saying and doing. So there is a little bit of excitement there, which was great, but I was very shocked when the bad guy said the D word. I was like, what? This one was fun, romantic, exciting, and it ends with a Christmas ball. Very, very, very fun. Book number 5 is The Lady and the Irishman. This one I would say is sweet. This one is very funny. There's some banter there, but it's also very calming, charming, romantic, interesting. There was no profanity. This one pulled at my heartstrings a little bit. I want to show you these physical books. Now, these have been on KU. The author also has a YouTube channel where the audio can be found there. There's just a real pretty still image while the narrator reads the story. And so that's lovely. If you can't find the audio free anywhere else, then the narrators are amazing. But these physical books, I love the style. But let's see, such wonderful little touches. This one, her name is Ivy, so there's Ivy, and then there's a little picture there. So you see the Ivy page ever so often. Just very sweet little touches. Love it so much. All right, and let's talk about the prequel. This one just shows us the Duke and the Duchess, of course, the parents of the kids and the ones that the whole story revolves around. It really just goes into how they met and their sweet little story. And it is only 118 pages. Yeah. But again, I'll show you. So you see the watercolor on the front. And then ever so often you see the flowers. I just love it. I love it so much. But at the time of this filming, they have been on Kindle Unlimited as well. Love it. So this one got 5 stars. This one got 5 stars. And this one got 5 stars. For the month, I read 2 classics, one of them being The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte. Now, this is probably another unpopular opinion. Now, I did like it. It's a classic and it's a Bronte, so it was dark and moody and it was interesting. The only thing I knew about the premise was that there's a woman who gets involved with a guy and it's not the best situation. He's not the best thing for her, and maybe there's like a castle involved. I wasn't sure. While this story had such an interesting premise, I loved how it starts out. The use of letters are there, epistolary, and you forget after a while that you're in the middle of letters being told. So that was really cool. I do recommend it. I just feel like, I think it was close to 600 pages, and I felt like each point of the plot line could have been shortened because I just feel like each part of it was a little bit too long and drawn out. But it was an interesting, enjoyable read. I just didn't fall head over heels. But 3 stars. The other classic that I read was The Mysteries of Udolpho by Radcliffe. I'll have to put an image here because I had to turn in my library loan. But I would love to own a copy of this book. Even though it was not my favorite classic, it was quite the adventure. Now, I had only heard about this book because of Jane Austen, because of a college class heavily about Jane Austen and Northanger Abbey. And then I read Northanger Abbey and the whole, Mysteries of Udolpho that's mentioned in that book. I was always curious about what this book was like that Jane Austen was referring to. Now, she is poking fun a little bit of the Gothic style of stories. For November, instead of reading Northanger Abbey again, I thought I would read The Mysteries of Udolpho. Now, I do appreciate that this author was the first, or one of the first, in the whole Gothic literature, and she didn't really have anybody else to go off. I just appreciate that so much about her. But this book was 715 pages. The whole beginning of the story is about a journey, and it could have been shortened by leaps and bounds. It could have been condensed and we still would have gotten the point. It was so long and drawn out. So it's kind of like this book has many different sections. There's first section with her dad, then the main character, then there's the next section with her aunt, and then we've got some love story, and then we've got her aunt, some changes happen and what goes on. And so there's like major sections, and each of them are just so drawn out. But I did enjoy it. I would read this book when I was at home, and then when I would go anywhere, I would listen to the audiobook, and it was very, very entertaining. The writing style is wonderful. I could envision everything that was going on in the landscape, and with the people, I could see what they looked like. But again, just way, way too long. But I did enjoy the dark and Gothic style, and I was so excited when we finally got to Udolpho, to the spookiness. That part I had been waiting for a very long time. It took me 2 months to read this book because I just decided I'm going to read little bits along and along until I get finished with it. And so for someone who likes to check the box, I'm done, it was a little hard for me to take my time reading through this, but I'm glad I did. I did enjoy it. But if you decide to read it, just know that it's going to take a while and just enjoy the adventure along the way. 4 stars. The Secret of Shadow Ranch by Carolyne King, Nancy Drew Mystery Stories, number 5. This one is very unique from the previous 4 that I just read, in that Nancy seems to have had quite the maturity jump. The writing style is completely different, so there's that. And she's not in River Heights anymore.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. We must be over the rainbow.
She has flown across the country on her own to go on a girls' vacation. It's the first time that her BFFs are mentioned. Cousins Bess and George are picking her up from the Arizona airport. So they pick her up, and of course they're telling her about all the sabotage that's happening on their uncle and aunt's ranch, and will she please stay and solve the mystery. So that's cool. But another difference is that once they get there to the ranch, there are all of these young, handsome them cowboys. And there's this vibe of, you know, noticing and I would say romance. Nothing happens whatsoever with any of them. However, there is that noticing of the guys by one of the girls especially. Nancy says, of course, she'll help.
Who are you?
Hello, I'm Nancy Drew. It's nice to meet you.
I wanted to share just a little bit here, read something. Also, this cover, I have always loved this cover with this beautiful black horse and Nancy with her little outfit and her red hair. There's our phantom horse in the background. George tugged her chair closer and bent forward. About 2 months ago, Uncle Ed and Aunt Bet acquired Shadow Ranch in payment of a debt. They'd always wanted to be ranchers, so they moved there. They started working. Some things started happening. They think everything's being sabotaged. At first, they weren't sure. Bess took up the story, but after last night, Uncle Ed said there was no doubt. What happened? Nancy asked. The phantom horse appeared, replied George. Nancy's eyes sparkled with interest. A phantom? Tell me. Bess shivered. It's the weirdest thing, all glowing white and filmy. We saw it across what we call the big meadow. George added, Shorty Steele, he's one of the ranch hands, says it's supposed to be the ghost of the horse which belonged to Dirk Valentine, an old-time outlaw. There's a very romantic legend about him, Bess says. He was the sweetheart of Frances Hummer. I'll stop there. So, yeah, we've got this romantic story. So, yeah, romance is a big part of this one, which is, I don't know, it's different. Yeah, love the cover. Love the story, really. Another interesting thing is that this guy that they're talking about, the outlaw, it does mention briefly that he didn't pass with natural causes. I'll just say that. And so there's that story. I thought that was interesting, that there is a part where an animal shows up and has been intentionally harmed by someone else. And, you know, it happens off page. We don't know what happened, but he comes and he's got, you know, some scrapes and things, and that's talked about. And it's not bad. I was just disappointed in that. I thought that was very unnecessary.
Why?
I thought that could have been left out, but anywho, I enjoyed it. It's Nancy. It wasn't, you know, extremely exciting, but it was interesting. There was a lot of outdoorsy stuff where they're hunting for kind of a treasure.
You're treasure hunters, aren't you?
And I thought that was fun. I gave it 3 stars. Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. This is book number 1 in his space trilogy. Now, before I start my review, I am not the target audience for this. I do not read sci-fi. However, I am a co-host for the C.S. Lewis Readathon for November, and one of the prompts is to read sci-fi. Also, on the bookshelves over there in the corner, our late son's book collection. He's got the trilogy right there, and it's very short, so it was not intimidating. I have always been so curious about this trilogy. It just kind of seems distinct from the others. I was very, very curious to see what this was all about. So I love how it starts out, and this Cambridge scholar is randomly taking a walking tour
here in the Berkshire countryside
when he comes to meet this woman who is in distress. She's come out of her house, and she suggests that he goes up the hill to a home where a fellow scholar is up there, she knows for sure. And then there's this other man that's there with him. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? But the next thing you know, he is man-napped and there's a spaceship.
My galactic travel-inator! You get inside it, it flies you up to, and I guess more to the point, through space.
You mean like a spaceship?
Well,
and there's some nefarious activity and, you know, some experiments going on. And he's kind of like, you know, right in the middle of it. So I don't want to say too much because I went into this not having any idea what this was about. I really did enjoy it. Now, it did not keep my attention throughout the entire book. When he gets to where they are going initially, all the talk about space and the planets and gravity and, you know, knowing what we know about space travel and all that to this point, that I was thinking about all of those things. And space travel is very interesting interesting. NASA, I love all that stuff. However, it did get a little slow, but I knew it being such a short book, I was very encouraged to keep going. And I did like when it got a little bit closer to the end, and he's actually talking to this very philosophical creature. And there was quite a lot of excitement of our main character and what he's been going through and just the creatures that he came in contact with. I don't want to say too much. But violence-wise, I didn't know what to expect. I don't do violence, and I was a little nervous because I was like, what is going to happen here? But everything was very gentle, nothing big trigger-wise. There is like a death, but it's not even talked about what actually happens. But very interesting. I will say the bad guys use the D word and the H word. Disappointed in that, but the Lord's name is used as an exclamation a couple times, just G-O-D. And yeah, just wanted to mention that. I'm glad I read it, but again, I'm definitely not the target audience, but I did enjoy it. Way to go, CS. 3 stars. The Story of the Treasure Seekers, book number 1 in the Bastable Children series by Edith Nesbit. Now, this was published in 1899, so I thought that was really cool. I was very interested in reading this book that I researched and found out was inspirational to C.S. Lewis. Honestly, I can't remember completely, but I want to think that maybe he did enjoy it as a young person. But this was very charming. I wasn't sure at the beginning, but intrigued me by it being in first person, and it's written, you're not really sure which of the Bastable kids that it is, because he starts out saying, I'm not going to tell you which of us 6 kids it is. You'll see later on. There's a real mysterious vibe to it.
Mysterious ways.
But it is in the first person of one of 6, and they have decided to restore the family fortune after their widower dad has lost his job. And it's just super charming, full of lots of quotes. Very, very vintage, yet it's British vintage. So some words, even as much as I read in Regency era and so forth, there were some words that I was not familiar with, but in context they made sense. But really, really charming. I enjoyed it. If you are planning to listen to this as an audiobook, which I did as well, it is not a thin book. It's pretty chunky, so it really could have been cut in half. Some of the stories I enjoyed more than others. They went through several different ploys, several different ideas of how to make this money. Some were more enjoyable to read about than others, but it definitely could have been shortened a lot. I used the audio to help me along, and there are some words that kids are taught not to say, typically to be polite, that aren't curse words, but I'm very glad I read it. 4 stars. C.S. Lewis at the Breakfast Table and Other Reminiscences, edited by James T. Como. This guy basically took the experiences of 22 different people in all walks of life in the different scenarios of C.S. Lewis's life, how they knew him or how they interacted with him, and he put that all together here just to give a very broad spectrum of what C.S. was really like in different stages of his life. It was definitely very, very interesting. You can see how thick it is. I am going to count this for a readathon because I did spend a lot of time
Yes.
skimming through it, but I did not read it word for word, so that's why I haven't put it on my Goodreads, because I'm not going to say that I read it and I'm not going to rate it. But I did enjoy it as a huge C.S. Lewis fan. And one story in particular, just one that's coming to mind right now, where there was a couple that found out about Lewis, enjoyed his writing, and they wrote to him, and he would always correspond with anybody that would write to him. He would always answer. That's actually how he met his wife initially. But they had written him as a couple from America, and they wanted to come and visit and just chat with him about all the scholarly things. And by the time they got there, though, Lewis's wife had just passed away the week before, and they didn't know it. So they get there and they correspond with him to let him know that they're there. They find out that she had passed, and they were like, oh, never mind. And he said, no. He met with them. They had some food and drink, and then the wife took pictures, and it has a letter that she wrote to him after their meeting, and then his correspondence to the couple. And it's just so interesting, like, just to see how he was joking about, like, in some of the pictures, there was this extra glass and he was like, whose glass was this? And he wrote it in all caps, and just so adorable, just so sweet. And he talked about, how much he enjoyed meeting them. Just so chill and friendly with people. It just really... it's impressive. So I'm going to count it for the readathon, even though I didn't read word for word. I would only recommend this because of the length, and some of the stories are pretty lengthy. I wouldn't pick this up unless you are a huge C.S. Lewis fan. That was quite the eclectic mix, the C.S. Lewis readathon, books that I have read and beyond. I hope you've enjoyed this, and until next time.